and welcome again to our first ever Resistance podcast live with an amazing studio audience. Guys, would you like to give it up for yourselves? Apologies for any technical difficulties. Tonight we have a fantastic lineup. We have our amazing guest, Graham Moore. Thank you. English constitutional expert. We have a fantastic band, Raw Milk Conspiracy, playing later. And for those of you on the live stream, you will be seeing the video for Ramis's brand new song, Never Give Up. So a big shout out to Ramis and all of the people who made that song possible. People will be hearing it in the room, on the live stream. You're going to be watching that video. Can I also shout out Knights Bullion, who've been fantastic in sponsoring this event and making it possible. If you guys don't want all of your money inflated away by the government, and we don't like the government inflating away all of our money, I highly advise you go check out Knights Bullion, links below. But shall we move on with the podcast? Graham, you are first ever repeat guest. You are absolutely fantastic. When we were picking out our guests, when we first started this podcast, I want a certain man, a certain expert on the Constitution, and his name is Graham Moore. I think you were one of the first people that we brought in, and you're our first ever guest that we've brought back, because I felt we went for about 2 hours and we barely scratched the surface. So give us a little bit of background for those of people who don't know you, who you are, and how you got into our Constitution.
So first of all, I mean, a lot of people know me as Daddy Dragon online. So I always get asked, where did the name Daddy Dragon come from? And it come from the fact that the dragon flag, right, it's actually called something else, but the dragon flag is the original flag of England before the St. George's flag. And it was always what the English, it was the standard that we took into battle. So people then started, because I only ever spoke of England, English law, common law, and all about England, obviously, people started calling me Father Dragon, and then it got cut to Daddy Dragon. So it actually comes from the original English flag. So how I started off on all this, when I was quite a bit younger, going back nearly 30 years, I got set up by the police. I ended up as a triple Cat A prisoner in HMP Belmarsh, rather similar to Julian Assange, for example, where he ended up. And because it was a complete setup from start to finish, I started reading through the law books, I started reading about prison law, I started reading about the Constitution, I started literally sitting in a cell reading law books, reading law books, reading law books, reading law books. And from that, I realised that the police couldn't do what they was doing. What they actually done was unlawful. There was various other elements to it which I won't go into, but the major point is, it tends to have a really big impact on your life when your liberty has been taken by corrupt police officers that don't care about you, don't care about your family, don't care that you're literally being strip searched everywhere you go, people looking up your backside when they've got no right to look up your backside because they class you as a very dangerous person, right? And all I did was went against the banks, right? So once people understand where it actually comes from, so when I got released from prison, I went and got a job. Within 18 months, I've been promoted about 6 times. I was on £80,000 a year, but I always had an interest in the law. But I could never be a barrister. I could never be a solicitor. Their system is corrupt to the core. Their system is a monopoly. They're now imposing what I describe as administrative law on a common law jurisdiction by stealth and lying to everyone. So all I'm trying to say to you is, when you've got the experience that I've had of my past and you put it into the future, when they start telling you lies, when they start, everything that they've ever told you is a lie. There is nothing that they've not told you that's not a lie. Everything is a lie. Everything is orchestrated. The wars are orchestrated. The media is orchestrated. Every part of the system is corrupt to the core, but especially the judiciary, right? So the reason is because they're there to protect us, and they're not protecting us. So that's basically where it comes from. During lockdown, more and more people were contacting me, various issues. We wrote a number of letters that then got published by the Daily Mail. They were also sent to the schools, telling the schools that if you inject children without consent, you are committing a criminal offence as well as a tort against the person, which is battery. We put all that out. It was all good law. It absolutely frightened the life out of the government. That's why they actually reversed their decisions. And then we was going, obviously, on the lockdowns. Most people will remember that we had all our banners. One of our banners is something like 4 metres by 6 metres of the English Bill of Rights at Trafalgar Square. They tried to arrest me. They've ripped the banners and the English Bill of Rights out of our hands before. These are police constables. So again, through the COVID and everyone coming together, which to some extent I'm quite disappointed about now, because too many people went straight from COVID and the absolute bureaucratic stimuli. I won't actually swear, you can use the initials. That and what they did to us really woke a lot of people up, but a lot of people then went straight into the next PSYOP, which was Ukraine, the next PSYOP, which is currently going on with Gaza, Israel, etc. All of these different places, and everyone needs to understand everything is controlled. So where I come from is telling you that you have constitutional rights. They are English, not British. There is no such thing as a British constitution. There never has been. People need to understand the difference, which hopefully we'll go through tonight. That also people must understand what a constitution is and what it's there for, and it is there to protect you against the power of the state. So you as an individual, and it's about, the common law is about your individual rights, the common law constitution is about your individual rights, and people have been told they haven't got a constitution, which is rubbish, right? So once you actually get into the conversation, if you want to talk about slavery, it was the English that stopped slavery. It was not the British. The British wanted to carry on. Wilberforce was a lovely fella, but it took him 20 consecutive years to pass the Abolition Act. And the reason he did was because the British wanted to carry on. And if I went into detail of that case, people go, wow, I never knew that. They never taught me that in school. So one of the things that I'm very big on is we, and I'm going to say the word white because I'm proud of being white, I'm proud of being English, and I'm proud of being a Christian, right? Those three things are being vilified by the far left and this other group of people. And if you want to get involved with them, I can. You're on YouTube, it might not help you very much. I can tell you now that we are targeted, right? So again, it's the English rights, it's the English common law that freed the slaves. And you can look at that, Somerset versus Stuart, 1762. And when people actually understand what went on and what we did to free the slaves, then they understand that the racism is projected by the British onto the English. And the reason for that is because the British do not have a constitution, they do not have a nationality, and the Union is the threat to England and the common law and every one of your rights.
Could you start by explaining what the common law is and what the roots of our constitution are?
Right, so what is the common law? The common law actually comes from the customs and ancient usage rights. So the easiest way to do it is to explain it. If you lived in Manchester and there was an abattoir at the bottom of the road, and that abattoir has always been there, and there was a certain thing that they used to do with pigs every Thursday, and all the roads you'd shut and they move all the pigs to the abattoir, that becomes customary, right? So if someone tried to stop you as a farmer from taking them pigs from A to B in that top part of Manchester at that particular time of day and that day of the week, right? If it went in front of a judge and the police tried to arrest you and said, listen, he's caused you an obstruction, he's done all this, and you turn around and said, listen, for 400 years, we've done the same thing. It is a custom of this village, it is a custom of this city that we do this on a Thursday, right? That's the common law. The common law is the judge listening, and by oath they have to listen to that. They'll listen to it and they'll say, well, that is their custom, that is their law, it is protected, and yes, he's got the right to do it. So that's the true common law. The true common law is what's known as judge-made law. So if they make a precedent, and I can give you some examples of that, restraint of trade doctrine, which I've mentioned before to people, most famous case possibly is Wayne Rooney. Basically, a corporation tried to steal his image rights via a contract. He took it to the High Court. The High Court turned around and said, we're not interested in your ancient rights and privileges. So we appealed it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court then said, oh, yes, we are, because that's the common law of England. And then they listed all of the ancient cases to do with restraint of trade going all the way back to the monarchy and printing, etc. And they said, you cannot restrain his trade and his right to earn a living. You can't do it. It's one of the things that we used against the lockdowns, right? And what you've got is a group of judges that try and dismiss the Constitution. They are unconstitutional, they betray their oath, and betraying their oath in law, there is a technical name for it, it's called perjury, and I'm not talking about perjury when you get on a witness box, I'm talking about perjuring your oath. Perjuring your oath is the equivalent to treason, right? But in English law, and when a police constable perjures his oath, he loses everything, which is why they're terrified of us at the moment, with the other case with Charlie Staples, which we're now proceeding with in Texas.
Well, I'd like to go through with Charlie Staples' case, but would you like to explain a little bit about our constitution then, and where we get our constitutional documents? Because a lot of people say we don't have a written constitution. Would you like to debunk some of that?
Well, I would massively debunk that. So we do have a written constitution. So the first thing I will say to everyone about this, because everyone talks about the Magna Carta, the Magna Carta, the Magna Carta, the Magna Carta, right? The Magna Carta is a fraction of our Constitution. It is an extremely important document. It can never be repealed by Parliament because it was outside Parliament's jurisdiction.
And it created Parliament.
Well, in effect, later on, there was a creation of Parliament. I mean, 1275, a lot of people don't know that the first Statute of Westminster, 1275, in fact tells you it was the first time ever that anyone in the world had given women the right not to be raped. And it come from England, it come from English law, and the first Statute of Westminster said you cannot ravish a woman, right? So what... Again, all of these laws come from ancient laws and customs. It comes from the Anglo-Saxons when we used to elect kings, right? So when you start seeing our constitution transported to America, they elect a king. The common law can give you a republic or it can give you a monarchy. We live in what's known as a constitutional monarchy. We don't live in a constitutional democracy. There's no such thing, right? The democracy is limited by our constitution and protected. So in other words, if 51 people turn around and say, we don't like your legs, we want them removed, and everyone voted on it, and you said, here, hang on a minute, I like my legs, I don't want you to remove them, right? Then your personal right comes into it, not democracy, right? So you've got constitutional rights to protect you as an individual. So there are many documents. You can go back to Anglo-Saxon, the triads. You can go back to many elements of when England was being built, when it was still separate monarchies, including Kent. Kent was the first king, the Kentish king was the first king that actually said you can't be a slave, right? So when all of these things come together, you then get the Charter of Liberties. One that often people forget about completely is the Charter of the Forests, which again give you the right to get food as long as you blew a horn. Whistle blowing is another thing that people don't realise, comes from English traditions. It started off with, if there was danger in the village, you'd come out and blow a horn. It then went to blowing whistles. The police had whistles, used to blow them, and people used to, believe it or not, help the police. You wouldn't believe it, would you? People actually used to help the police. And people used to take their own guns out of their houses and race down after the police to help the police. So all of these things, and the Charter of Liberties, all of these things, and there's so many of them, are written documents, right? So the common law, basically, a judge should take them into account. So if you used to stand in front of a judge and then say, well, the Magna Carta says this, most of the judges today have never been trained in the Constitution. My opinion is you need at least a 3-year, and this is very important to this podcast, you need a 3-year foundational degree, if you want to call it that, in the constitutional constructs of our nation, right? Before you even touch on the law. And if you haven't done that, I've done 30 years, people have looked at my library at home, some of my books are 300, 400, 500-year-old original books, right? So you can't get this information off the internet. You can only get it from the old books. And they used to tell you the truth. It wasn't like it was now, where everything is a lie. So when you start going through all these, I mean, I've got one of my leaflets on there. I mean, generally, I read through these and we hand out these leaflets to people. But just some of them, the Magna Carta 1215, the Magna Carta 1297, which was a parliamentary act of Parliament, observance of due process of law 1368. Why is that so important? Because it's still law now, and it tells you if there are any processes that are not followed in English law, then whatever happens to you is null and void, right? That's the law of the land. You've got the Petition of Rights 1627. Again, people don't know that our petition rights actually go back hundreds of years, where you have got the right to say basically anything you want, as long as you're not causing people any damage, right? Declaration of Rights 1688. What is it? It's known as the original contract. It is what governs the Crown. And and by the way, King Charles III has now breached and perjured his oath, right? There have been kings in the past who have done it. They've apologised and got away with it. There's others that have lost their heads. I'm not suggesting he loses his heads, but what I am saying is he's got no right to that throne whatsoever, right? So he's gone against the Declaration of Rights. You then got something called the Bill of Rights, which I speak about a lot. Again, the British done some terrible things with that. In 1868, they unlawfully, ultra-vires, repealed Article 3. What is Article 3? Article 3 tells you that all of our ancient rights and customs are protected by the English Bill of Rights. It came from a convention parliament, which is not an ordinary parliament.
It was a special parliament.
A very special parliament, 17
because
days.
there was a constitutional crisis, so they convened it for a special occasion.
Exactly that.
And it was there to set the constitution. So they weren't just called in, oh, here's a normal parliament. No. They were called in for the purposes of writing a constitution, so it is differentiated from other parliaments.
Yeah, and so what you'll find, for various reasons, that again the British Union of the people who've done this, their best queen was Queen Anne. Queen Anne protected us. So let me just make sure everyone's aware of this before I say any more, because this is where it can get rather amusing. I've got nothing against the Scots, by the way. I love the Scots to bits, and the Welsh and the Irish, right? So, again, we used to be a Commonwealth. And if you go all the way back and you actually read the constitution that was devised by Cromwell, it tells you, even under his rule, that anything that's done against an Englishman's rights is null and void, right? The Acts of Settlement tells you that as well, which is 1701. And once you start to understand how it all fits together, what you do then is reverse engineer what the British have done, right? So getting back to the Constitution, and I will get back to the Bill of Rights because it's important. The Convention Parliament is extremely important. The whole events of 1688 and the Glorious 1688 and the Glorious Revolution are really important.
Do you want to give people a little bit of historical detail of what happened?
So the basis of it is in 1688, over 3,000 English men left England and resided in Holland. There's a couple of A Kingdom Without a King is another book. You only want to read the old books, and really you want to read them where they are what I describe as foreign journalists and foreign historians. I'll tell you for why, because they don't taint it with the British control elements, right? So the basis of it is there was basically an army there. They wanted to take England back. The king was being tyrannous, and especially towards the Protestant religion.
That was James II.
Yeah, James II, and again, tyrannous against the English, particularly tyrannous against the Protestant religion. And so there was other wars going on in Europe at the time. The Prince of Orange, lately known as, and Mary, basically come over to England. They landed at Brixham and Devon on November the 5th, 1688, right? So remember, we've just had an election, right, that was on the 4th of July. If anyone knows what the 4th of July is in America, and I've been out there celebrating with them, right? 4th of July is Independence Day, and it seems very odd to me that we've now got, on the 5th of November this year, an election in America where a certain person is called Orange Man Bad. Who is the other Orange Man Bad on November the 5th, 1688? His name was Prince William, William of Orange. And basically what he did was he read out something on the steps of Brixton, which was basically a declaration of reasons. So what he done was he was telling the people, I'm not here to harm you, I am here as a liberation force. And that is exactly what it was. All the ships come in, the horses, they actually got blown in. They was going further up north, just to make sure everyone's aware of this. 9 out of 10 times, it's always the north that take back England, right? The Northerners are a different class of people to what they are in the south. And I don't mean that with disrespect, they just are, right? And instead, they got blown over into Brixton, they got brought in, and then they started their march. People say it was a bloodless revolution. It wasn't. There was a battle just outside Windsor. The king was getting all sorts of nosebleeds and wasn't very well, had severe high blood pressure because everyone was having a go at him. He ended up discarding the Seal of England in the River Thames, which I believe they actually relocated another time. He got all the way down the River Thames, got all the way down to Ramsgate, and they was about to put him on a boat to France to get him out of the way, because they didn't want him to lose his head. And then a fisherman caught him and said, you want him back in London? and everyone went, no, let him get on the boat, right? So they didn't want to kill him. They said, let him go. We've done what we've got to do. We've taken back the country, etc. Now, one of the things that people don't understand about that is you've got the Declaration of Reasons. That was read out in London. It was never signed as such, but it was enrolled, and it is still in the House of Lords to this day as a parchment, right? So you can actually go and see that. We asked for it to be actually brought to court once, and they refused, right? Which technically they're not allowed to do it. I asked the judge, have you ever read the Declaration? And they said no. And I said, well, how can you be learned in our Constitution if you've never read the Declaration? And the Declaration of Reason, Declaration of Rights. So that's the original contract. That's the one that Sir William Blackstone speaks about. It's the one that is broadly spoken about because it's a contracting law between the Crown and the people, right? And it's the only reason they're allowed to govern is because of that, right? And then you add other elements to it, which was the Bill of Rights, but most importantly, you had the Coronation Oath Act, 1688, Crown and Parliament Act, Recognition Act, 1689. There's a slight change in the years because of the way the dates worked at the time. And the Act of Settlement is an extension, right? So people don't realise how important the Act of Settlement is. It is equally important as the English Bill of Rights. And Chapter 4 actually tells you that the laws of England are the birthright of an Englishman, right? So they can't take them off you. And I just want to emphasise this to everyone listening to this, right? There are a lot of people out there at the moment that get in the hump with all the foreigners, with all the blacks, with all the different whatever's going on there. Nowhere in the English Constitution does it ever speak of race, right? It does talk about religion, and there's a particular reason for that, but it doesn't talk about race, right? The English Constitution protects everybody, regardless of the skin colour, right? The most important thing that people must understand is the people that are trying to destroy the English Constitution are using people of colour, I'll use that term, I don't like using it, right? People of colour against white English Christians. And as soon as people start to realise that they have been told a lie from the beginning, that England freed the slaves, not the British, they wanted to carry on, and all these other people. But this the constitutional elements of all of this is crucial to your freedom and liberty, and to the freedom of liberty of your grandchildren and your future children. It doesn't matter what colour you are, right? So the major thing is, and I'll just finish on this, there are other rights that you've got. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and I'll say it again, there's lots of people out there that argue with, for certain reasons, about indigenous, right? The white English people are indigenous to this country, and that is confirmed by the United Nations, Usenco 1992, whether you like it or not, that's a fact. White English people, and especially England. England has been a country since 927, 1,067 years old, and even the Maoris in New Zealand have only been there 750 years, right? So it's always the left, it's always these people, mainly with degrees, and I'm not insulting anyone here that's got a degree, right?
It was a waste of time when I did one.
Right. So generally speaking, working class people that do a proper real job every day of their life have got a different way of thinking. They see things in black and white. If you see something falling down, you pick it up and you make it work again, right? People with degrees can't do that, right? They are weird, right? And the things that they come out with, and especially anything to do with the lawyers, solicitors, barristers, judges, they are the same group of people. There was a slow march through the institutions. Marxism has completely taken over this country. It is not fascist, it is communist. And when people realise exactly what's going on, the only people that can take it back are you, as individuals. There is no knight in shining armour. You are the heroes, not a knight in shining armour.
So, with all of these constitutional acts, they entrench fundamental rights, which cannot then be taken away. Right. Why is it you deem some of them to be constitutional and so unrepealable? Is it because they've been around for hundreds of years and so have essentially become part of the common law and established as custom for such a long period of time?
Right, so there's a number of things to say about that, because you've just raised some really important points, right? So the first thing I'll say to you is there is a difference between the European Court of Human Rights and the English Constitution in a major way, right? And people don't understand. The European Convention of Human Rights has what's known as qualifiable rights, right? So that means if the government create an emergency, they can qualify your rights, right? That means they can take your right away. The English Constitution does not do that. They are not qualifiable rights, they are indelible rights, they are rights that God gave you, right? No man can take that right away from you. No man can tell you what to think. No man can tell you what to say. You can say what you like as long as you don't cause someone else injury, right? What does that mean? Right? If you go back through time, constitutional law as well, we used to take 10 paces on a Sunday morning, turn and face each other because someone has slighted you or slighted your reputation, right? So what did they bring in? They brought in defamation laws, and they only brought them in the 1800s. And why did they do that? Because people kept shooting each other on a Sunday morning, right? It was fairly obvious. Someone had to say, listen, can we turn this in? Can you not do it another way?
Oh, but Graham, I have been defamed by
so many times,
Channel 4, The Sun, The Mail, I'm pretty sure ITV probably, I think Sky News. I'm not sure about all of the mainstream media outlets who have defamed me, but I would love to duel the mainstream media.
Well,
Can we not go back? Please, pistols at dawn, let's do this.
Well, the answer to that is you possibly could go back to that if you wanted to. I mean, we could look the law up on it. There's some famous cases to do with that. But so all I'm doing is explaining to you the difference between these types of rights. So you've got to remember the European Convention of Human Rights wasn't put in place to protect you. It was put in place to protect the system. It's a bit like what's going on, although I shouldn't mention it on this show, the National Health Service and a certain, let's say, nurse, right, that's just got a massive prison sentence. The system is geared to protect itself. It is not geared there for you. It's not there to protect you. It's to protect itself, right? And that's basically what's going on. So the constitutional rights, and there are various rights that we've had. Mainly the English Bill of Rights gave you the right, and we've still got this. So I want people to know you've got the right to keep and bear arms for self-defence, right? That right was given to the Americans. It's their Second Amendment. That right come from ours. There's a famous Her case in America where he actually went through the English law and he said it comes from the English Bill of Rights. And this is one of their top Supreme Court judges, right? And I actually corrected him, right? And I said it didn't come from the English Bill of Rights. The English Bill of Rights confirmed that it was customary and the law of the land for Englishmen to be armed for their self-defence, to defend themselves, their family and the realm. That is why you have a firearm. Are there laws that say that you can't go around shooting people? Of course there is. God's law says you are not allowed to murder people, right? You're not allowed to shoot someone. You're not allowed to rob someone. There are laws there, right? But what you are allowed to do is to defend your family, your own life against anyone who is a threat to them. And that's what that law is there to protect. And the reason why they took it off you in 1921 and then advanced it was because of the Communist Revolution and what they'd done to the Tsars, what the Bolsheviks done to the Tsars in Russia, right? Because they thought we was going to do... And the reason I know this is because my granddad had come back from the First World War and he was one of the people that was marching outside Buckingham Palace with his firearms, right, against the monarchy for what they'd done to our men on them fronts, right? That's what happened, and then they took your guns.
So we've got these rights because they've always existed, or this is my understanding, we've got these rights because they've always existed, or they've been introduced and they've become customary. How long would you say it takes for something to become customary?
The answer to that is it can be... So what you're actually talking about now is something that they term in the legal profession as entrenched law. Yeah. So entrenched law means, and I'll get back to the... There was a very famous case in 1953, and it was when Her Majesty the Queen was being, just to give you an example of this, because everyone quotes A.V. Dicey and says, he says Parliament is sovereign. It is not sovereign. You are sovereign, right?
And in fact, he wrote a book later
and
where
then he wrote a book,
repudiated.
and in the book, but in this very famous case of 1953, it was to do with the naming of the Queen. The Scots said you can't name her this. The English said, of course we can. And there was an argument about because there was different monarchs.
The numerals. Because
yeah,
they would say...
It was a silly thing.
Yeah, for the Scottish, obviously, they said, well, we haven't had a Queen Elizabeth I. So to us, she's not Queen Elizabeth II.
Right, so that's what the argument was about. And then the main Attorney General, they call him something else in Scotland. I'm not an expert in Scottish constitutional law, but what they said was, basically, we accept, so the government accepted, there are constitutional laws, and if they have certain phrases in those laws, you cannot change them. For example, the English Bill of Rights says forever 4 times. It says in all time to come twice, and it says forever twice. The Magna Carta says in perpetuity. That means forever, right? Any law that says it's forever, and it is written and put in, it's a constitutional law, it cannot be impliably repealed. That was already confirmed by Sir John Laws in the metric martyr case, right? There was a big case in Sunderland, and it was to do with a pound of bananas. Anyone who's watched me for years, about 10 years ago, I did a video that went viral on Facebook before they banned me, right? And the basis of it was I had a pound of bananas on my shoulder and went through the whole story with a pound of bananas on my shoulder, just to tell people so they recognise this whole case is about a pound of bananas, right? And that's what it was about, because they wanted to, they was basically arrested him for selling a pound of bananas in metric. And he was saying, I'm not doing, I'm English, I'm using our own weights and measures.
So he was selling in imperial, you mean?
He was selling an imperial, and they wanted to impose metric, and that's what the metric, it was called the Sunderland case. So getting back to the law on the Constitution and your constitutional rights, the system is telling you you haven't got any rights. The system is telling you you haven't got a written constitution. That is a lie. That is the biggest lie that's ever been told. And the people that are doing that, again, if I went into the history of it, the Acts of Union, some people say it's the British Constitution. It isn't. The Acts of Union is a treaty. It was a treaty between Scotland and England. And if anyone's here who's Scottish that really wants to know the full story about what actually happened, the Scots tried to colonise part of South America. It's called the Darien Gap.
Yeah,
right?
Is it like the Mosquito Coast was the nickname or something like that? It was full of mosquitoes, wasn't it?
So they made two strategic errors in trying to colonise South America, and the biggest one was they couldn't fight the indigenous population. Right, the indigenous population fought back. The basis of it is it was a very strategic area, even at that time. And it is now, because that's where the invasion's coming from into the USA. So the Scots basically majorly bankrupted themselves, right? So
can I say as well, they also picked a very, very hot, sunny place to go. Yeah. They picked a place with a big swamp, and also they picked a place that had been, they picked somewhere that had been already claimed by Spain. And I just don't think it's a good idea for, thousands upon thousands of very, very, very pale Scottish people to be turning up in a tropical climate with a lot of mosquitoes.
Well, so again, if people actually knew the real history of it, they would understand that Scotland was bankrupt. And I mean, when I say bankrupt, I mean bankrupt. They had bankrupted themselves. It wasn't the people of the Highlands, so it wasn't normal everyday Scots. It was the people in the lowlands, Glasgow, Edinburgh, all of the major city areas, of the financing. They bankrupted themselves. And what they actually did was the King of Scotland asked the English king, in effect, can we join up there? Can we have a trade and we'll have a commission and we'll do all this? And that's exactly what they did. And once they created that, the Acts of Union was a treaty, and people need to understand what a treaty is. A treaty is sovereign to sovereign, right? It is not, I repeat, not sovereign to subject. Sovereign to subject is your constitutional protections against the state and the monarchy, right? Sovereign to sovereign is a treaty. The treaty is now in bad faith, by the way, because what it did was it protected the English constitution, and it protected the Scottish constitution. One of their oldest documents is the Declaration of Arbroath, for example, right? I don't know about all them documents because I'm not Scottish. I like Scotland and I like the Scots, right? But it's not my culture, it's not my country, right? I'll just let them get on with it. If you want to be a communist country, be a communist country, right? It ain't going to have no problem with me. If you start importing loads of people and they started flooding across the border, you just put literally a big wall up. Right? That's what people do to protect their countries or their houses or whatever. So, again, getting back to all of that, once you understand what the Acts of Union really was, and the British identity never really come about. They did it once in 1708, right? Where this was an amusing thing. They actually turned around and said, we're going to save all the Protestants. This is England. We're going to save all the Protestants all around the world. So they created a law in 1708, and they allowed for 3 years all the Protestants from all over the world to flood into this country. And within 3 years, they said, we've got to stop this. We're being flooded. It's changing our culture. So even in 1708, they got it, right? They went, stop it, right? And they stopped it. The point being, it went from there in the British Nationalities Act 1947 and the British Nationalities Act 1981, where they completely erased English identity, Scottish identity, Irish identity, Welsh identity, and replaced it. How many people have you now go to the post office, go to the format, and it says British, and it will not say, you're not allowed to say you're English, you're Welsh, you're Irish, or Scot. It only says you're British. The last person that did that was a guy called Joseph Stalin, who was the commissar of identity in the USSR, right? So people need to wake up with what these people are doing, and it has gone on now for well in excess of 150 years. It goes back to the Chartists, it goes back to Peterloo when they slaughtered us in the streets. The British killed men, women, and children, right? I've done a speech in Peterloo in August. When I explained it to people, lots of people turned up there and they understand that it is the British that's the problem. How does it create a problem, right? Because as a nation of England, you have a set of laws and constitution that protects you as individuals and your future generations. That's what the Act of Settlement says. If you are born of English parents, you are an Englishman, right? That's the first thing it says. The thing that you have to understand about what these people are doing, you create a union, a political union, you put that above the constitutions of the nation, and guess what, people? That's when you control the nations, because then you get the people coming in who are nefarious towards your nation, who control the union. That's why your parliament is full up with these people that absolutely hate you, right?
Well, I'd say that they do seem to hate us. So would you say, so can I just check, what you're saying is that the Acts of Union, essentially, because they put us in a treaty with Scotland, and because we're then considered theoretically, or by most people in Parliament, as one country, they start to see the constitutional documents of our own land as being less important because they're just one of a set of different constitutional documents, because they've got the Scottish ones, they've got the English ones. It becomes more about political convenience preserving this union rather than focusing first and foremost on what our laws are, what our rights are as Englishmen.
Yeah, so you've just hit the nail on the head, really. It's about preserving the union, and it's preserving their best interest, not yours. That's exactly what they're doing. That's what the political class have done. That's what they've done in 1911 with the Parliament Act. People don't realise that... don't forget, we've reverse engineered everything they've done. And when we show people, they go, wow, I never knew that, right? And there's things they've done by stealth that they never declare to the English or the Scots or the Irish or the Welsh what the British have done. And they hid certain things. Everyone's heard the term buried in legislation. Well, that's what they did. They buried it in legislation and people didn't realise what they was actually doing. So getting back to your point, the union, and I want to make sure I'm absolutely clear on this, right? The union did not create a country. Your country is England. My country is England. When I speak of my country, I speak of England, right? Not a British political union. That is what is destroying your rights as we speak. They are the people that stuck the jabs in you. They're the people that told you COVID jabs were safe and effective. The very same people that are telling you you haven't got a constitution and you are British. The very same people are the ones who have lied to you from the start.
Graham,
that's what you've got to understand.
I've got a question though. When do you? What is the date from which you date England? What is the year of its birth?
927.
Which king?
King Athelstan.
Ah, good. So you know about King Athelstan.
So let me just. I always have this conversation with Americans. I'm not a historian in terms of kings, queens, especially Americans, and it seems every American I've ever met is related to a king of England, right? But so I'm not about history. So I'm not a David Starkey, right? What I do is look at the legal history and the archives, right? And unless the archives is talking about a particular king, 9 out of 10 times it's not really. It just gives you at the top what reign the king was under.
Well, I'd just like to speak a little bit about
Go on.
King Athelstan, because King Athelstan was. It even says this on coins. It says Rex Tutti Britanniae, so King of all Britain, because not only did he conquer and gain submission from Wales, so Wales was under him, under England, he also conquered the whole of Scotland. So is the solution to this problem simply to, let's say, reignite and reclaim the conquest of Athelstan? Say that we, as the English, conquered Wales, we conquered Scotland. Really, this is part of our country, and therefore we can dispense with the Acts of Union, and we can say everyone has fundamental rights under English law. There's a precedent.
Is that a solution?
I mean, it's a bit cheeky.
I think you would get some argument from the Scots on that, but I don't completely disagree with what you've just said, because some things that I see, and I'm not being disrespectful, you're talking about the political elites in Scotland. They're the ones who create the division. I personally see Scotland as a completely separate nation, a separate country. When I drive over the border of Scotland, I believe I'm in a separate country. I am in a separate country.
Well, you're under a separate jurisdiction of law.
Separate jurisdiction of law. They're under Roman law. We're under the common law. And again, when people understand what they're trying to do is impose upon us the Roman law jurisdiction. So you just mentioned Britannica. That come from the Romans. The Romans actually see, and still do see, the Holy Roman See and the Holy Roman Empire see Britain and the British Isles as an extension of the Holy Roman Empire. And when people actually understand what they're doing and who's controlling it all, it's one of the reasons why a certain president of Russia recently said in a speech, "We're not part of your Roman Empire, and we never will be." So when people really understand what's going on in the background, they understand it's not a good thing to be referring to Britannica or Britain as a country. It's a political union, and the only real way of taking it all back, I mean, every single bit of your rights, without any doubts whatsoever, is to void the Acts of Union. By the way, the Acts of Union was never done by a referendum. They never asked us. The English didn't want it, and the Scots didn't want it, right? And it has been used as a manipulative political tool to take back control, centralise in London, right? And here's the killer. They did the same thing in America. Right, the War of 1860, the Civil War, was actually caused over the same thing to then centralise, which is now what they've got in Washington DC and the federal government, which is why you see people like Texas and Texas, right, which invited me over to speak at their Texas event, because they're independent sovereign states, they're independent sovereign nations. Each state has its own jurisdiction. Right, so England was the same. What people don't get about England was we used to be a confederacy, and what is it that the central controllers don't like? They don't like confederacies. So we was a confederacy. I'll give you another example.
Well, it's the counties, wasn't it?
Sorry?
It was the counties, because each county had slightly different customs, so each county would have a
Correct.
slightly different common law, but you still have all of your fundamental rights.
Correct. So what happened? You had counties and shires. Never forget the shires, because the shires are really important. The main star shire is Yorkshire, right? And what you've seen is them break up Yorkshire. You're now seeing a regionalisation of England. Right, which, if you look at what they say the country, they say the nations and regions of the UK, and that's because they will not say the word England. Right, it is England that's under attack, and it's under attack for a specific reason. It is the common law of England that protects you against communism and fascism. And I always say to people, when the communists call me a Nazi, right, and then the Nazis call me a communist, and I always say to both of them, I'm neither, mate, I'm an Englishman, right? I don't believe in any form of authoritarian rule. Do you understand that? You can't tell me what to do, you can't tell me what to do. And again, when you go back and look at history and see what happened in Russia with the Bolsheviks, they killed 70 million Christians, right? They killed 70 million. No one wants to talk about it. No one brings it up. It's rubbed out of history, and that's exactly what they intend to do with England, right? And the only way you can take it back is you as individuals have to stand up for your children, your grandchildren, come out onto the streets with passive resistance and say, we are a common law jurisdiction, we want our country back. Not a Nigel Farage moment, he's a Benedict Arnold, right? The man's no good to no one. Tommy Robinson. Don't like him, not a Zionist, not interested at all. I'm talking, and let me tell you something now, everyone who's listening to this, hopefully this stays on YouTube, right? If you void the Acts of Union, do you know what else you void with it? The Balfour Agreement, right? The Palestinian Mandate of 1923. You void the whole lot of it because none of it has got any authority anymore, right? Then you take it back to the United Nations and say, we've sorted this out. We haven't got a union. You haven't got a Balfour Agreement. You've got nothing from the people of England. Now sort it out yourselves. And that will put an end to that situation, and it will go back to being Palestine, right? And it will go back to being all of these people getting on with each other. The people causing the problems are the globalists, and the globalists are right at the centre, and it also comes from the Fabian Society. So when you start to look at all this stuff and you go into the history...
Well, there has been a massive infiltration, hasn't there?
Massive. They infiltrate... So, again, I had a really pleasant conversation at the bar, quite surprising. I always say to people, and I have to be very careful what I say on YouTube or any other platform, right? Everyone wants to talk. If you go and have a talk now about criminals, let's talk about the Russian mafia, right? They're nasty people, right? They are corrupt to the core. They've gone right the way through all elements of society. They are the nastiest people you could ever meet in your life, right? But that doesn't mean I'm talking about every single Russian. When I talk about the Italian mafia, I'm not talking about every single Italian. When I'm talking about the Albanian mafia, I'm not talking about every single Albanian. And when I talk about one group of a mafiosa that is above all else, right? Above all else and controls this world and controls all of the mafias, all of the countries, right? And that is the Jewish mafia. And no one's allowed to talk about them, right? You have to turn around and say, we have had enough of this, right? They've been expelled from enough countries around the world. You have to be honest. And I'm not suggesting in any way that every Jew is a bad person. That is not what I'm saying, right? But it is a narcissistic religion that persecutes others, right? There's two religions in the world that don't want usury. Usury, in English law, technically is forbidden, right? That means interest. Do you all understand what that means? Two religions ban it. What are the two religions that are pitched against each other on the planet Earth today? Islam and Christianity. And who do you think's doing that? Who do you think's doing it? Do you think it's Islam? Do you think it's the Christians? No, it isn't. There's another group of people doing it. And that's what you've got to understand. And again, they just shut you down. It's all part of English law.
So you treat people as individuals.
I hope this don't get you banned.
I don't think it will, because you're not attacking a massive group. But are you worried about the way that they're pushing this idea of group identity? So the people would look at me and they go, oh, well, you're in the black group, even though I'm clearly half white. You know, half black, half white. But then they would put me in the black group and say, okay, you as a black man, not me as an Englishman, not me as a free man, not me as an individual. They would put me within a group. How does that sit against English law? And how does this group mentality function against English law?
Right. So you've asked another really good question. And it is always a difficult conversation. I had a conversation with a Nigerian cab driver, and he described himself as Nigerian, right? And said he was British, right? So 20 minutes we was in the car, having a conversation about the British and the English, right? And when I got out of the car, I said, what are you, English or British? And he went, I'm English, right? So I said, right. I said, so we've now established it only takes 20 minutes for me to make sure that you understand the difference between the British and an Englishman. And he went, yeah, got it. I absolutely got it. I'm English, right? So my point to you is this, right? You cannot be, and I don't care who you are or what you are, you cannot be indigenous, white English, right? Unless you are white, right? You can't be an indigenous Englishman, right? My answer is always this, right? And there's lots of people now talking about re-immigration, right? Do I agree with that? Largely I do, right? Because of the infiltration and the type of people that are flooding this country, right? Does that mean that I dislike all black people, brown people, Chinese people, whatever? No, it doesn't, right? It means you can be culturally English. What is culturally English? Culturally English means you respect English law, you respect the English constitution, you want to work hard, you want to support your family, and if you want to carry a gun, you can carry a gun, and you realise, the same as me, that you should not break the law. That is about being an Englishman, right? It's as simple as that.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So again, there are. I will say this to people. There's lots of people talking about re-immigration, and it started coming out. I've seen some silly nonsense coming out with some people. Right. I'll emphasise again to everyone: we have indigenous rights as white English Christians. Right. That is backed by the United Nations, whether I like them or not. It is international law. We are regarded, white English Christians are regarded as an indigenous population, whether you like it or not, right? It's only the left that don't like it. When I talk to black people, they love it, right? And when they understand the real history, when black people are actually told the real history of slavery, they always say to me, I never knew that. I never knew that Granville Sharp was the person, and I didn't know that blacks used to make their way to England to be free, right? Why did they do that? Why didn't they go to Scotland? Why didn't they go to Wales? Why didn't they go to France or Holland, right? They come to England. And why did they come to England? Because we said you cannot be a slave. The English air is so pure to breathe, you cannot be a slave in England, right? And as soon as a black person's feet touched the floor or the shore of England, they were free, right? That's what happened. That is the reality. That is the real history of England. And it is the British that have lied to everyone. And again, without going into too much detail, all you've got to do is go and have a look. And I put a tweet out today. Who owned the cotton plantations? Most of the cotton plantations in Georgia, right? They weren't Englishmen, they weren't Irishmen. Who were they? What was the religion, right? Well, it weren't Christian, I can tell you that now, right? So when you start looking at the history, who owned the boats? The majority of the boats, not all of them, but who owned the boats? Who owned the insurance companies? Who was running the trade? And it weren't the English, right? Who was it? It was this mafiosa in the background.
So Graham, a lot of people feel that their rights have been taken away. I think most people are in this room because they're worried about their rights being removed or at least ignored or trampled upon. You brought up Tommy Robinson earlier. I'd like to specifically ask you on this matter about the right to remain silent, because I know you disagree with him, but I know you'll still stand up for his fundamental rights regardless. They interviewed him under the Terrorism Act, I believe it was, and they told him he did not have the right to remain silent. Could you go into a little bit of detail before we open everything up to any Patreon questions or any questions from the audience on YouTube? Could you tell us a little bit about this right to remain silent and why you think it's important?
Well, so the first thing I'll say to everyone, and there's been a number of people, I believe most of it was set up, most of it was, when I say set up, I mean the media set up with riots all over the country, etc. Don't forget, almost everything that you're witnessing is a lie. Almost everything you're witnessing is being orchestrated by the media, and it is all controlled. So the first thing you should always remember, if you are arrested or a police officer comes up to you and wants to arrest you for anything, the first thing you say is no comment. The second thing you say is no comment, and the third thing you say is no comment. I want to make sure everyone's aware of this, right? If you ever get taken into an interview room, and I've spent many hours in them, right, they will say to you, some people just stare at the wall, right? You can stare at the wall or just say no comment, right? But they'll take the interview, and they didn't used to do this, so it's probably in the last 25, 30 years they've brought in taped interviews. Before that, you used to get something called verbaled, where the police would literally write a load of lies about what you've just said and sign it, right? So you need to be very careful about the police. They're not there. They're not your friends, right? Ask any police officer. If a police officer gets arrested, what's the first thing he says on his interview? No comment, right? So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you. Why is no comment so important? Because you have the right to remain silent. You have the right, as long as it's an indictable offence or triable, either way, you have the right to a jury, right? And we've had people in front of juries and we've got not guilties, right? A unanimous not guilties, right? And against the police, just to let you know, right? So people need to understand no comment's really important. But if you was asked a question, so you've been asked a series of questions and there will always be incriminating questions, and you've said no comment, no comment, no comment, no comment, think about what the police officer's doing, because the questions are all going to be transcribed out, right? He then says to you, or she says to you, do you want a cup of tea? You say, yeah. That goes in front of the judge. The judge says he's answered some questions, right? All of them lists of questions are now going to be put to the jury with you saying no comment, so it looks like you're incriminating yourself, right? You say absolutely nothing. That's it, right? And when you get into a court, you say no comment. They'll ask you if you're pleading guilty or not guilty. You say not guilty, and I want this referred to a jury. If it is an triable either way or an indictable offence, you have the right to a jury. No one can say anything. Don't go with a solicitor. Don't go with a barrister. Defend yourself, right? And what I'm saying is most people can defend themselves. And once a jury, most people don't understand the power of a jury, right? Let me just explain to you the power of an English jury, right? When 12 good men and true are sworn in and take oath as a juror, you are taking an oath in your own conscience, right? That means a judge can't tell you what to do, the King of England can't tell you what to do, and the Crown can't tell you what to do, right? Parliament can't tell you what to do, right? So let's just make sure we get this right. You're in front of a jury, and the jury, and they have to be told this, and by the way, a barrister won't tell them, a judge won't tell them, a solicitor won't tell them, the only people who tell them are people like me. You are the only people that can make a decision in your own conscience, right? You, in my individual case, for example, can void parliamentary law, the King's law, and the common law. You are the only group of people that can do that anywhere in the world, right? And the reason is because it's an English jury and you have your own conscience and your own oath. Right? So you can take that out. The people don't realise the power of the jury. What does that mean? Who's sovereign? You're sovereign. Every single one of you is sovereign. When you get pulled up to that jury and you are a jury member and you take oath, you are sovereign. You are the only person that can nullify all the laws of England in an instant like that. And the only thing that can never be appealed, most people don't know this, is a not guilty verdict, right? And one of the things that they did to stitch us up was the Stephen Lawrence situation. Everyone should have heard of that one, right? And what they did, by stealth, they brought something in the background which is completely unconstitutional. It's against the common law of England. And what they brought in was double jeopardy. So they could try you twice for the same crime, right? The reason why that was taken out of our laws was because of what the tyranny had done to us before. And what they used was that case to go against the English law, and they should never have done it. There should never be anything called double jeopardy in this country, right?
Do you want to explain a little bit, Graham, about what happened when they could just try people after when they've been found not guilty?
What it means is you'll have what's known as repeated prosecutions, right? So I understand the situation that they had with the Lawrences, that a young kid was murdered. There's people being murdered all over the place, right? I'm not disrespecting that. I'm just telling you that last year, 23 people died in the hands of the Metropolitan Police and English and Welsh Police, right? 23 people, 19 were white. This is in police custody, right? 19 were white, 3 were black, 1 was Asian, 1 was mixed race, right? No one's standing up for the white man being killed here, right? Being killed by the authorities, and no one's doing anything, right? 1,888 people died in English and Welsh custody since 1990. No one's done anything. The only people doing anything are us, the English Constitution Society, right? And everyone's ignoring it. They're murdering you, right? They're murdering your kids, right? So when you look at double jeopardy, what happens? They will try you and try you and try you until they get the right verdict, right? That's why we said you can't have double jeopardy in this country. And again, they've changed it all by stealth. People need to understand the laws are there to protect you for a reason. They're there to protect you from tyranny. You've just seen what they've done again with the jabs. You've seen what they've done with the lockdowns. You see how they beat us at Trafalgar Square, right? We did nothing wrong. These people are pure evil. And part of what they're getting the money from is their pension schemes. When I said to people, I told to people recently, do you know how much the average chief constable of police gets in his back pocket when he retires? Cash, not taxed, cash. £500,000. How many of you can go and earn that in a lifetime, right? And you wonder why these people are going against you, right? The average police constable with 30 years as a police constable, and by the way, they're crown servants, right? They are not public servants. We do not live in a republic. We live under the monarchy. So when people start understanding what it is the police are doing, and the Marxists are literally bribing these people with forward bribes, but sooner or later they're going to lose the lot. And especially when people stand up. You've all got rights, by the way, and you have the right to arrest a police officer. You've all got the right of citizen's arrest. It's unique to the English law, as long as you're witnessing the crime being committed. So if you've got 100, 200, 1,000, 10,000 of us passively resisting the tyranny in this country, and the police draw batons, and you have shown no violence whatsoever, right? You, as individuals, can arrest them police officers for the threat of battery. It's called assault. When you threaten violence against someone, it's called assault, right? When you draw a baton or draw gas, like the 93-year-old I was talking about earlier, we're the only people covering the case. 93 years old, one leg, with dementia, in a wheelchair, right? He was tasered, battered, right? And gassed by the police. He died 2 weeks later. 93 years old with dementia. What has anyone done about it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the police are getting away with this, and they're getting away with it because you don't know what your rights are, right? You need to understand what your rights are. You need to take your rights back. You need to claim your rights back. They haven't disappeared. They haven't gone forever. It's because they brainwashed you into believing that you haven't got a constitution and you haven't got a written constitution. You have. And English rights protects everyone. I don't care what colour you are. I do get on a bit of a rant sometimes, so I apologise for that.
Right, so whilst the guys queue up, if we've got any Patreon questions coming, if you'd like to get ready with any Patreon questions, and then after that we'll go to the audience, I'd just like to ask you one final bit. Do you want to give us a little bit of your record on cases that you've won and lost, and maybe a little bit of an update on the Charlie Staple case?
Well, I've had quite a few. I mean, I've had about 10 cases, mainly to do with freedom of speech, mainly with the police lying. And again, I've acted as a Mackenzie friend. A recent, this is an amusing case, but a recent case where someone called English Bulldog was arrested by the police. I think it was a Section 5 Public Order Act, whatever it was that they arrested him from. They physically arrested him. They physically handcuffed him. They starved his animals for 2 days. Wouldn't let him get anyone. Wouldn't even let him have a phone call. Held him in custody for 2 days. He contacted me. I happen to know him as well. I looked at his case, and I said, "So they've arrested you?" And he said, "Yeah, here's the video. Look." I said, "All right." I said, "It's not an arrestable offence." And he went, "What?" Right, so he's been held in custody for 2 days in a police station. He's been brutalised by the people. It's not even an arrestable offence, right? They can only summons you, right? So what all they had to do was take his name and address down, write his name and address down, and say you're summoned to appear before a magistrate, right? So it goes into court. I've written out a full case statement, wrote out the whole law about it. The other thing they said was a public order offence because he told me to F off, right? So I've shown all the High Court cases where the judge said, stop wasting our time. It is not illegal to tell a police officer to F off, right? So when you put all this in front of them, and all of a sudden you'll get this, you know, like the clerk of the court or whatever they want to call them now, looking all through it. All these police officers turned up in court to give evidence against him, put the case stated in, magistrates read through it, the clerk of the court read through it, and said, we offer no evidence. And that was it. And then the police officers literally run out of the court, right? So again, it was a situation where it wasn't even an arrestable offence, right? So, and then we've got the situation, people don't understand. Now, this is really important. I want people to understand this. There's something called UNCAT, which is the United Nations Convention Against Torture. It was ratified by the British. What does it mean? It brings something in called universal jurisdiction. Why is it important? And I'm going to give you an example. Even Russia, I say even Russia, it ain't a bad place to live, I've got to tell you, right? Even Russia prosecutes torture. They prosecuted 4 police officers in the last 20 years for torture when they found out that they've done certain things against a citizen of Russia, and they've gone bang, 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 right, you're up on charges for doing it. Why is universal jurisdiction important? Because it was ratified by the British, and what happened was we also brought it into domestic law. How did we do that? It was called the Criminal Justice Act 1988, Section 134. It is entitled torture. If you go and read that law, it will tell you, right, that police officers using unlawful violence against you, either for coercion or for any form of enforcement of state policy, not law, that is regarded as torture. There's 2 types of torture, severe pain or psychological, right? In Charles Staples' case, it was 2 because the police officers lied. By the way, he got a unanimous not guilty in front of a jury at Isleworth Crown Court. And the 4 police officers who give evidence basically tried to charge him, one of them tried to charge him with, first of all, it was assaulting an emergency worker, right? And by the way, since they brought that law in 2019, I believe it was, over 19,000 prosecutions, right? It was brought in to protect the National Health Service and paramedics and nurses. It was not brought in to protect police officers, right? And what they do is they nick you for that. And because they couldn't prove that he bit him, and he didn't bit him because we've got the video.
Yep. And right? Where have we heard that accusation before?
Exactly. So what they do is they use this against people.
I think I heard that accusation about 3 weeks ago as well, and I'm 99% sure it didn't happen in that case. It just keeps coming. It's like the gift that keeps giving to the Met Police. You know, it's like that YouTube video where the kid goes, "Oh, he bit me." They just can't stop it, can they?
And again, there's particular reasons why they do all this stuff. So all of this is going it's been into we're in the High Court. Just to let you all know, the police tried to argue. And by the way, it was me arguing with their barrister in the High Court, and there's people who was there at the time that are in this audience now. They tried to argue with a High Court judge that only the police chief, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner or a Chief Constable is vicariously liable for the torture of his officers because it's a corporation, right? I said that is not true. And then I produced the evidence from the Police Federation that actually stated that it wasn't true, and they said that every individual every police constable is an individual and liable for his own actions. He takes an oath to the Crown. He is a Crown servant. He is there is no corporate entity to it, right? So again, there's a lot of people out there who talk about corporations. I'm not bitching at them. I'm just telling you some of what you've learned. 95% of what you're being told on YouTube is absolute BS, right? 5% of it is true. And the problem is that what they do is they distract from people like me, from yourself, from people presenting the truth to you, because you all run off doing all these weird and wonderful things. There's another lady I spoke to here tonight. We've got something called, I think, lawful observers or something like that. That's fine. I mean, we've actually got our own little group, and we've got high visors on that say legal observer. Legal observers have actually been authorised by the High Court. So if you're an independent person and you've got and you're highlighted as a legal observer, and you're recording the police and any protest, and your information can be used on either. So in other words, you become a professional witness. The High Court accepts you as a professional witness, right? As long as you don't get involved, you're not allowed to be involved with a protest. You're not allowed to be involved with the police, but you can show independently to that court what actually happened, and that's basically what happened in Charlie Staples' case. So with this case, the court, and this is the High Court of England, basically agreed with us and said police officers are individually liable, right? That means that all of the 4 police officers that we've brought up on tort, we did try and prosecute them. That's going over to Texas, right, in a case against torture. What actually happens now, it means that each individual police officer is being personally sued, as well as the police commissioner. What does that mean? It means they individually are responsible to pay any damages that the jury award for unconstitutional behaviour, right? And there's a series of legal terms that they use. And basically, they're trying everything to shut the case down, right? Literally, because now they're in the doodah, right? Because now a High Court judge has made that judgment. They didn't appeal it, by the way, which means they agree with your judgment. And this is the crucial part. It's now going over to the other side of the court, and we've got to think till January to start producing all the stuff. But the second part of it is, and I want everyone to understand exactly what I'm saying, under universal jurisdiction, we can bring a case against individual officers for torture, because we tried to do it here. It was not backed by the Attorney General. It was not backed by the Solicitor General. We went to the High Court. We went for appeal, 7 days, got it all through, right? And now, because we followed the due process of law, we are now bringing a case against King Charles III as the boss of his servants, right? Crown servants, police officers. So King Charles III is the first time ever a King of England has been indicted in the United States of America in Texas, and it is actually happening, right? That's what the power of the law, the power of international law, only if you know about it. As long as these people ain't crooked.
Could you just explain how you're able to bring it in Texas, just for anyone who doesn't know?
Right, so Universal, there's another story to this, and again, you have to be very careful with this story because it will get you banned on most things, right? It's best for me to tell you the other story. Universal jurisdiction is crucially important, and the reason why it is because it's fairly obvious the British regime will not prosecute itself, right? So in other words, if you've got a judge, I don't know, that's whatever, right? I won't go into detail, but you all sort of get what I mean with judges and kids, you know? And there can be an element of torture with it, especially if he has done it in an official capacity, right? So if he's doing X to a kid while he's in his robes and using his authority to do all them things, that's classed as torture. It's not classed as molestation. It's not classed as child rape. It's classed as torture because he's done it in his official capacity, right? He's used his influence to do it, right? What it means is that another jurisdiction that has been ratified, so the British ratified universal jurisdiction with the United States of America. Why are we bringing it in Texas in particular? Because one of the things about universal jurisdiction and American law is that you have to have a direct connection to the country, right? Well, Texas has got a direct connection with England. In 1836, under its state constitution, when it won independence from the Mexicans, and after that war, they adopted the English constitution and the common law in its entirety. Most people don't know that. It's in their constitution. There is a direct link between Texas and England. That is why you can pick up a common lawyer from England, put them in Texas, and they can speak in any court in Texas because the laws are the same, the process is the same. And the reason their culture is just like ours is because they have an English culture, right? That is why they're an armed nation. That's why they're wonderful people in Texas, right? It's like going to England, but they've got different accents and they wear funny hats and big boots, right?
And it doesn't rain as much.
And it doesn't rain as much. They've got a lot of bores. We've got a lot of bores, but most of our bores are in Parliament. So the major point is, if you understand universal jurisdiction, it can only be brought in a federal court, but the federal court is in Texas. So at the federal court we're bringing it in is in Texas. The lawyers are in Texas. They're common law judges and lawyers, real common law judges and lawyers who know their stuff, right? And the process is being done out there. And then once it goes through the process element of universal jurisdiction, it goes into a federal court case, but being heard in Texas by a Texas judge, even though he's a federal judge, right? What happens then is King Charles III is then formally indicted for torture. That's actually happening now. The 4 police officers are being formally indicted for torture. That's happening now. That process is going forward now. Because they rejected us in England, they're using administrative law, they're trying to shut us down, they're trying to do all these things, and we're saying we're not happening. And remember, Charles Staples is one of us, right? One is an English constitutionalist. He was 23 years old when this happened to him. He was completely passive, non-violent, and Will's was videoed the whole thing, right? I can tell you now, we've got video evidence of everything that happened. This is the most important thing you should remember. He's one of you, right? He was one of you that was standing on them marches when they was beating us. And people have to remember, if you don't stand up for yourself now, you've lost it for your kids. The oldest saying in the world, right? Never surrender. And that's exactly what we're doing. They don't like us. They don't want us. We've been interfered with in the background with the old bill. I've had all my accounts shut down, PayPal, shut down on Facebook, shut down on YouTube, shut down last week, right? Shut down on Twitter, believe it or not, for talking about the English Constitution, right? So again, people think Twitter's to be trusted. Twitter is not to be trusted. Let me get back to the universal jurisdiction thing before I forget about this. Right?
So the way it works basically is that you can bring a court case in a different country so long as you've both signed up and there happens to be some sort of link between your systems.
Correct.
Because it overrides the ability for your own system to be corrupt. So you can go over to maybe Canada or the United States and bring a case against what's happened in England. And that is a safeguard. Yeah. Well, no, I probably wouldn't.
So let me just explain something else to the audience who's listening. Because if you think, most people are shocked when I tell them this, right? Royal Dutch Shell in Holland, right? There were a number of directors of that corporation. Some years ago in the late 90s, they instructed the president of Nigeria to torture and murder 9 eco activists in Nigeria, right? So they was protecting their village from Royal Dutch Shell that was basically polluting the whole area. Their family couldn't live in. They was indigenous to the area, blah, blah, blah. They were eco activists, and Royal Dutch Shell said, top them, right? And he tortured them and hung them, right? What you all don't know is one of them directors, his name was Sir Vince Cable, right? Let me tell you something now, right? I've been cut off on airwaves and all sorts when I bring his name up, right? It's known as Parliament's dirty secret, right? Those Nigerians tried to bring a case under torture in this country, and this British regime shut them down, right? Do you know what they did? They took the case under universal jurisdiction to New York, and they got a massive, massive, massive payout, right? So what I'm saying, telling you, the law works, but you have to understand it, you have to know what the law is, and you have to do it properly. You have to do it by due process, right? Don't listen to these people who are out there giving you a fraction of the law. I've read law for 30 years. I understand our Constitution and I understand our rights, and I'm there to protect you from the system, right? I'm not interested in Labour politics. I'm not interested in Jeremy Corbyn. I quite like him, I actually went to see him once down in Colchester, and everyone called me a communist, right? And I said, I just want to listen to what the geezer's saying. I just want to hear him, right? I'm not a communist, I just want to hear him. So again, all of these different people, right? But everything's been hijacked. Everything has been hijacked. And you've got to trust people that really do care about you. That's it.
Right, gentlemen, do we have any questions on the Patreon? Do we have questions from the Patreon, Steve? Do we have a Patreon question? Oh, we've got an actual Patreon in the room. Oh, do you want to come up? First question, and then I think we'll open it up. And we will open up the questions to the room. Thank you to our glamorous assistant here.
Yeah, interesting what you're saying about basically those police officers, by the way, who tasered the guy with one leg. They've both been charged with murder. I'm not sure what's happened to that case, but what you're saying about the American Constitution is interesting because all the founding fathers of America were of English descent. But basically, would you agree? This is my question. The other name for magistrates' court is police courts. Yeah. Now, apart from stipendiary magistrates who do have some understanding of law, do you know how much a lay magistrate, what sort of training, how many days or weeks it is? It's 5 days. I mean, I think we should abolish magistrates' courts. At least, and there's one person in this room tonight who actually swore on the Magna Carta and was acquitted. I won't mention any names, but and the judge actually, I think, was impressed with him swearing on the Magna Carta. Would you agree that magistrates' courts should be abolished?
No. Easy answer. I do agree they're called police courts, and they always were. People don't realise the other side of this, that the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, has only existed since 1985, right? Most people think it's been there for eternity. It hasn't. Prior to that, it was always the police and the police courts that prosecuted you, right?
Well, what about before the police?
Sorry?
What about before the police existed?
The former police?
No, before the police existed.
No, then it went back to sheriffs and constables and all sorts of things, and it went. There's a whole history of that. It's really interesting when you look into it. It'd take forever to go through the history of it, and I'd have to research some of my notes. But getting back to that question, it isn't so the issue that you've got today isn't the magistrates technically, and I'm going to tell you the reason why. Right. It's the way that the courts are operated. One, the people in charge of them are the Crown Prosecution Service, right? They've only existed since 1985, right? The system has become corrupt. The clerks are supposed to advise, right? They call them something else now, legal assistants or whatever nonsense they've got, and they're legally qualified, right? I've had so many arguments with them. It's unbelievable, and they are so arrogant. Right, because they've got a degree coming out of their rear end, right? They think that someone who has studied the Constitution and the law for 30 years is an idiot, right? Unless you've got a degree, right, which is all BS. So the next question I'll say to you is, when you get a panel of magistrates, the magistrate is like an extreme petite jury. Each magistrate takes an oath, right? And they should be operating in their own conscience. They're not doing that. Right? So I believe their training is wrong. And again, I've said this earlier on in the podcast. Lawyers and solicitors and judges, before you become or go into advanced training for solicitor, a barrister, etc., right? You should do a 2 to 3 year fundamental constitutional training course, right? And done by the English, by the way, not the British, right? And that way, you would at least understand what the English laws of the realms are all about, right? So there was other parts of that question which I've actually forgot. What was the other parts of the question?
It was about the police courts and whether we should get rid of magistrates.
Yeah. So I don't think we should get rid of them. I do believe that we need. So I'll put it this way: if I had 50 of you and trained you on the Constitution, and then you become magistrates, and you weren't taking notice of the CPS and what the Crown Prosecution Service was telling you and demanding, you was being told and educated by someone who had been trained properly in the court what the law is, right? Then there wouldn't be a problem with the magistrate system. There's the magistrate system has been corrupted by the British, and in particular from 1985. They brought in the Crown Prosecution Service in 1985 because they believed that the police system was corrupt. The whole thing is corrupt. Every element is now corrupt. That's the difference.
Okay. Well, are there any other people who'd like to come up and ask a question of Graham?
And the only other thing I'll briefly say to everyone, carry on though, but briefly remember this, that our Constitution isn't just the Magna Carta, right? There are many constitutional documents and laws that cover our rights.
Sir, I just got a quick question. I'd like to know, correct me if I'm wrong, do I have the right to bear arms?
Yeah.
Could you expand on this? Because I didn't know this.
Well, the right to keep and bear arms, so it was a pre-existing right, which is the most important thing. So the Declaration of Rights, the Declaration of Reasons, but most importantly, it was enshrined in the English Bill of Rights. I can't remember what article it is. I think it's Article 5. And it basically says that you have the right to keep and bear arms as a Protestant, but bear in mind this was protecting the Protestant religion as well, which is now being destroyed, and suitable to your conditions. The lefty arguments that normally come back at you, suitable for your conditions, means we can make laws to stop you. No, that's not what it meant. What you do is you go back and read when they created that, and there's books that actually show you, because there was 27 heads of terms. One of the heads of terms covered the right to keep and bear arms, and it was brought up at the time that this is what they was worried about, just to make sure we're all aware of what's going on here, right? They didn't mind peasants having firearms and rifles and knives and bayonets and swords and all sorts of stuff, right? What they didn't want you doing was killing their deer and their ducks, right, and their goats, right? That's what they was concerned with. They was concerned with poaching, right? So what they said was, there's already laws on poaching. It's already unlawful to murder someone. It's already unlawful to take someone's wildlife off of their farm. I could go back to other bits and pieces. So, do you have the right to keep and bear arms? Yes. What they tell you, wrongly, is that these firearms laws and firearms acts, etc., are all restricting your rights. Most people don't know that still in Northern Ireland, you have the right to keep and bear arms untouched. They say, I've got a different opinion on this, they say that so in Northern Ireland, in this country, you can't write on it says, what's the reason for a firearm, right? You can't write self-defence. They said self-defence is not a good reason, right? That's completely unlawful.
Shame.
In Northern Ireland, you can write self-defence and they'll give you a firearm. Well, don't give you have to buy a firearm. You still got concealed carry in Northern Ireland. Huh? Well, again, it's, people don't... The thing is, you're up against people that are British establishment that where they believe Parliament is sovereign and Parliament is not sovereign. Parliament is not sovereign, right? That is a complete fallacy. It's a lie. We have something in this country under English law called separation of powers, the judiciary, the monarch, and Parliament, right? I'm not suggesting Parliament isn't the supreme legislator. It is, but that does not mean it is sovereign. It means it is the main group of people that writes out the legislation, but it is limited in its legislation by the Constitution of England.
Yes. All right, do we have anyone else who's coming up to ask a question? Or I believe we have a glamorous assistant taking a lead down.
Hello. Great talk, by the way. Love it.
No worries.
I get everything you're saying is that we're sovereign, yeah, and we've got to take our own power back. But we need a collective. Is it too far-fetched to start our own parliament under English constitution? Because when we go into their so-called boat maritime law, you've got to have the time, the energy, and resources.
Let me stop you there, right? So I'm going to get back to your Parliament. What you've just said is really important, and I totally agree with you. Listen, most people that talk to me about different things mean well, right? You just mentioned Admiralty law, right? I don't get involved with all that, right? Admiralty law is there for a reason, right? If you go and read the law, and I can read you some fantastic cases about Admiralty law where two ships have hit each other and they're turning around to each other and saying, I'm not responsible, I'm not responsible. You need to have a law of the sea, right? Absolutely. It's not the law of the land. Absolutely. It does not cover this country in terms of the law of the land, right? It's not being used in a high court against you unless you've got some sort of problem with, generally, with salvage on a ship, right? So all these people who talk about that, I don't get involved with it. I can show you videos of actual judges talking about it. Getting back to your point, right? The question is, do you want to take back your rights and do you want to take back your country? And most people say yes. How do we do it? First thing you have to do, you have to be organised. The second, you must only use passive resistance unless violence is used against you, and you have the right to self-defence, and you have the right as a citizen of England or a subject of England to arrest anyone that is offering violence towards you for no reason whatsoever, right? And especially freedom of speech. How do you do it? The answer is you're not going to do it with Tommy Robinson, right? You're not going to do it with any of these people that are racist, right? And I'm not using the word racist as they do. I'm talking about people that, for whatever reason, I believe that racism is a psychological injury to your brain. That's what I believe, right? Most people are bigoted, not racist, and they become bigoted because of things and what's happening to them, and what people are not seeing in the background is what they're doing with all this division. And by the way, the British have always done it. Every element in the world, the British, every single flashpoint in the world currently has been created by the British, right? People need to understand, if you want to take back, you need to take back this country county by county and shire by shire. You need to be organised in your counties. You need to fly your English flag. You need to fly your county flag because it means something to you, right? And you need to drop this British flag and this British Union. You need to come out passively, just like we did when we took to the streets for the COVID jabs and the lockdowns, etc. And instead of being infiltrated by Marxists, which that movement has been, right? The only movement I see that was not infiltrated was rebels on roundabouts, right? Because then people just stood there silently with signs, right? It was the best communication method I have ever seen. If the same groups of people went out and said, we have English rights, this is what we're doing, we're taking back our country, do I believe that we would go to an English parliament, a Scottish Parliament, a Welsh Parliament? Wales became part of England in 1536. It's got nothing to do with the actual union whatsoever. It was already absorbed into England. Have I got a problem with their culture and them being their own people? Of course I've not, right? In fact, many of the Welsh people I've met, I absolutely love them. I understand why they get in the hump with people keep going in there, buying all cheap properties and living in holiday lets. So would you if it was happening to you, right? The point I'm trying to make here is all of this is possible. What makes it not possible is the infiltration of our groups, right? And the types of people that are currently leading. And that includes people like Tommy Robinson, right? Listen, it's not even English, he's Irish. And guess what? The Irish took his passport off him, right? They took his passport off him. So again, all I'm saying to people is, yes, you can do it, right? But you need to get organised. And you need people out there that really do understand it. Not the ones that are giving you all the BS and pretending. Actually go and speak to people who have read the law. Real law, from real law books and the real history of England. And then you'll find out that all of your rights will be returned to you. And you can remove the tyranny. But you're the people who have to do it. Listen, I'm about working class people. Some people say to me, I don't want to talk about class systems, right? I don't care. Listen, I am just a normal, everyday working man. That is it. I'm nothing special, right? If I can know all this, you can know it all, right? And you need to be passing that knowledge on to your generations, your future generations. We was given an eternal flame of freedom to pass on to our future generations. And we are the generation that is failing. People have got to learn how and what our constitution is. Can we take back Parliament? Yeah. Listen, I don't want Parliament in London, right? If it was down to me, I would surround London. I would take the whole of the rest of England back, the shires, the counties, and I would starve out London. And I would literally say, listen, there's the road to France, see you later, right? Absolutely. Get out of my country and get out of my capital city.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
So you're evicting me then, Graham, as a Londoner?
Listen, I'm going up north. I've had enough down here, right? At least with a northerner, you get a frank conversation about literally anything, right? And again, I've been to Scotland quite a few times. I absolutely adore the Scots, right? And again, they are being... When you talk to Scots, they're just nice people, right? And everyone has been lied to. Everyone's been lied to about what this union is. What?
So, have you got your flat cap ready?
Sorry?
Have you got your flat cap ready?
Me what?
Flat cap.
Flat cap. Well, I did actually see someone up there with a pair of whippets and I started laughing. Yeah, I mean, I drove all the way to Scotland once and the funniest thing ever happened. I pulled up outside of a fish and chip shop, right, near Glasgow. I drove all the way from London, not even stopping to use the toilet, right? That's how bad it was. Got all the way up there and I've stopped and there's a Chinaman behind the jump, like doing it. And I walked in there, I still have some chips, please, and he started to talk to me in a broad Glaswegian accent, and I just started laughing, and he was like looking at me thinking, what are you laughing at me for? And I said, I've just got out of the car from London and I got a Chinaman like talking with a Scottish accent. Do you know what I mean? It's just something to amuse me. It happened in Newcastle as well with an Indian fella, and I was like just looking at him because he had this broad Newcastle accent. I love the diversity of England is about our accents, about our counties, about our customs. Do you know what I mean? That's what our real diversity is. You know, you shouldn't look down on someone, you know, because they've got a South London accent like me. And that's what these people do. You know, they look down on you because, you know, you don't speak like them. And you ain't got a degree coming out your backside. Who wants a degree? Do you know what I mean? You know, now they're doing all these nonsense degrees, and what do you actually get from it? They're flipping burgers in McDonald's. Do you know what I mean? Look at the trades. Look what they took off you. Look what the trades, the bricklayers, the plasterers, the roofers, right? The glazers, right? All of the trades from the building trades. You can go and earn 100 grand a year. Why did they want to take it off you? Who was it who took from the people, the working class, apprenticeships, real apprenticeships? Do you know who took it? Tony Blair.
Yes.
So do we have any more questions coming up? Okay, we've got a bit of a queue, so I'm sure Laura will administrate.
If I'm talking too much, just tell me.
I just got 2 points. Not sure if it's going to be relevant. Sorry, I was told when Parliament is at recess, their very long holidays recess, that is the opportunity that the people can actually take back Parliament, but nobody really knows about it and nobody really knows how. Is that true? That's 1 point.
Yes and no is the answer. So parliamentary recess, when you talk about recess, the only true time that the people, that Parliament gets completely handed back to the executive and the Crown is during the election period, right? And that's when you'll notice that MPs are not allowed to call themselves MPs and things like that. So recess is not as such because it's just a sort of a quasi-holiday period. What people don't realise is that Parliament should be held frequently. That means every year, maximum every 3 years, and that's part of our constitution. Again, it was the Marxists that changed that. Again, Tony Blair, I think it was, that changed it to 5-year parliaments, and they started to reverse certain things. There's other things that he did. I mean, when you're talking about parliamentary laws, you've got the laws of Parliament, the laws of the Crown, and you've got the laws of the subject. We have a separation of powers. Parliament is run effectively by the laws of Ernst and May, which is basically a big rule book. People don't realise their own power. You shouldn't have political parties. it's about you're supposed to be representing your constituents. There shouldn't be people don't even realise this. Did you know why they have a 1, 2 and 3 line whip? Does anyone know what it means? Do you know what it means? So they put on 1 line, it means like, you know, we're having a little bitch, you need to do as you're told. 2 line, a 3 line, which means if you go against the vote of the party in Parliament, we'll throw you out of the party, right? The 1, 2 and 3 line whip is actually a code. Why is it a code? Because in the Act of Settlement, it actually tells you it's unlawful to influence a member of Parliament, even as a political party. And what they had to do was define a code, right? And it's called the 3 line whip. Most people don't even know that is illegal and unconstitutional. You should not have political parties in the way that we've got them today running this country, because they're not representing you. They're representing the interests of their party and their donors and the people that literally pay them millions of pounds. You're already seeing it again. And they're all doing it, by the way. It's not, don't just blame the Labour Party, Fabian Society, etc. But so get back to your main question: can we take back Parliament? My personal view on that is the only time that there are a number of ways that you can do it. One of the ways is Ashby versus White, 1703, where you actually write on your ballot, "I do not consent," right? And if the "I do not consent" are higher than the actual amount of votes for any of the candidates, for example, then the "I do not consent's habit." What happens then? It goes to what's known as a common law court, which is basically parliamentary court in the High Court. They look at it. It's actually called an election court. They are highly trained judges on election law. But Ashby versus White, 1703. If you read the full judgment, it actually tells you lots of BS coming out there from people on YouTube and other things saying what a load of rubbish or whatever. It's the law of the land. There were 3 different reasons why it stepped in on that particular law. It's the only real way that you can take fallback power, and the reason why you can do it is because it causes what's known as a constitutional crisis. It calls the king in, it calls the judiciary in, and it calls Parliament in, because they have no longer got the legitimate government by consent. And the reason why that happens is because you write "I do not consent" on your ballot. That is constitutional law. Queen Anne stepped in and pre-wrote Parliament. The Lord Chief Justice stepped in, wrote a 200-page judgment on the whole thing, explaining to everyone. And one of the things that Parliament tried to do was, in this particular case, is they was trying to say that the court case was nothing to do with the judiciary, because they was bringing these people into Parliament, because Parliament's a court in its own right. A lot of people don't know that, right? And they was trying to bring these people into the court. And what the judiciary said was, you can't be a judge in your own cause. That's the English common law, right? And that's why the separation of power exists, because you cannot be a judge in your own cause. So you can't have the Crown dealing. It's another reason why you can't have a judge, who technically shouldn't have a judge, dealing with a compensation claim from because he's a Crown servant. So a judge is a Crown servant, and so is a police one. So the judge shouldn't be making up what you're, because otherwise the judge will say, well, I'll give you £1, right? When it's worth £1 million. That's why when you go to America and anything happens with your constitutional rights, you get £100 million payout, because the jury says, no. If they'd done that to me, I'd want £100 million. That's my right? That's what they're terrified of.
But when they count the votes, anything that's not across, apparently they're deemed as spoilt ballots.
No, right. So again,
staff counting aren't trained properly.
Right. So let me just make sure that I'm clear on this. Right. The law is very clear on spoilt ballots. Right. So every spoilt ballot has to be counted. Right. It has to be counted by law. They can call it what they like. They can call it a spoilt ballot. What I'm telling you is, on that spoilt ballot, if it says "I do not consent," Ashby versus White, 1703, right? And I'm giving you an example. If 20 million people did that, Parliament is no longer sovereign. Well, not sovereign. It's never been sovereign. Parliament is no longer legitimate. You create a constitutional crisis. That is a fact of law, right? That is not someone on the internet saying, "Oh yeah," but. Listen, I'm telling you now, for you to go and get millions of people to do it would be nigh on impossible, right? That's the thing is, you get, what's the word I'm looking for? Idealists, right? I tend to a lot of times speak to idealists, right? You've got to be a realist, right? And the realistic, if I was really real, there's some things I would not say on this podcast, right? Because I am a realist, right? What I'm trying to say to people is, there are certain ways you can take the country back. The only way that you will really do it is with passive out on the streets and start getting organised, and through passive resistance, right? There's nothing the state can do. Do you know one person who did it and was successful? Everyone should know his name. He's a guy called Gandhi, right? He beat the British, right? And he beat them at their own game. The reason why he beat them, because he knew he couldn't beat the British, even though there was millions of them. He couldn't meet, because the British are designed for divide and rule and violence against the person, right? They done it to us in Peterloo in 1819. They slaughtered men, women and children. 19 of us died, right? 70,000. And all we was doing was asking for the vote. Nothing else. And making a declaration not to pay tax. And they drew their sabres and they attacked us and cut us down. Men, women and children in that crowd. They cavalry charged us. They haven't changed, right? Nothing's changed. The only way you're going to take it back is passive-aggressive. And so you need to be passively out on the streets, and that's the only way you're ever going to do it. But getting back to your points with Parliament, there's not really many ways you can take Parliament back. I've heard all sorts of stories, and most of it's not true.
I'm not going to ask my next question. All I want to say, may God's grace, love and protection be with you, and his whole army of angels protect you, because, man, you need it. I love you to bits. It's the first time I've heard of you today, and it's the first time I've seen you, and I mean, just, wow. Thank you so much. God bless you.
God bless you. The other thing you have to remember is the common law is God's law. And that's actually in history been stated.
Hello. So, greetings. Well, that was amazing. Thank you very much. I mean, brilliant stuff you've been telling us. Okay, you should applaud him, I think. Him. Okay. Yeah, I agree with, your last points are fantastic. The point I wanted to make is that England always was a place where you had rights. And I think that explains also why Don't Mess with a Texan is also commonly held. But I think what we have now is the World Economic Forum or Fabians, whatever. They telling us really that rights are given to you by the state, just like they're saying about health is given to you by the state. It's all about control, control, control. And the question is, how to take it back. And I think you've touched on a lot already. But the idea a lot of people have, oh, yes, it's all in the law, it's all written down, just got to read common law or what you say, and then we'll be okay. No, that isn't the case. It's all written down, yes, but it doesn't make it happen. The only way we can make it happen is to understand that rights are not given, or taken even, they're kept. We have to keep our rights, and that necessitates action, which you talked about. And now we have a mega enemy, namely the World Economic Forum. The whole world megacorps are organised against us. And I think you're right, the only way forward is when the right time comes, we have to take to the streets. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Was there a question in there, Piers?
Well, all right, you want a question on it. Do you agree what's the best way of taking on the World Economic Forum? Okay, thank you.
So the first thing I say about the World Economic Forum is that they are not fascist, they are Marxists. People need to understand the difference between communism and fascism. I'm not suggesting I like either. It's fairly obvious. I do not like any form of authoritarian regime. I believe I am an individual. God give me individual rights, and man cannot take them rights off me, right? That means a fascist and communist will do exactly that. The World Economic Forum is in effect, and if you know the history of the Fabian Society, And going back before then, you've got the Rhodes Scholars and all sorts of other stuff I can get into, which is all factual, by the way. It's not conspiracy theories, it's all factual, right? People need to understand that the Fabian Society are the most dangerous people on this planet, right? They have destroyed the working class, they destroyed the Labour Party, they actually founded the Labour Party, and they did it to con you, right? The people who founded the Fabian Society were the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and the pharmaceuticals, right? You are being controlled by these people in all different levels. And again, once people understand who they are, I mean, again, my group some years ago arrested Sadiq Khan. I was asked, we arrested him on public. We went to about 190 countries because it was live at the time, right? And we arrested him for subverting the English Constitution. And part of the charge was that you have subverted the English Constitution as members and executive members of the Fabian Society, right? And the first thing the press said to me was, you've arrested him because he's a Muslim. I said, no. I've arrested him for subverting the English Constitution and being an executive member of the Fabian Society that have corrupted the politics in this country, that created the 1911 Parliament Act, that's taken virtually every one of your rights away from you, right? And there's certain people in the Labour Party who know exactly what I'm talking about, right? They can't stand them. They're too powerful. They are backed by mega money, right? And let me just make sure you're all clear on this, right? The Fabians have made, there's a book there called The Fabian Highway into the USA, right? The only person I've ever heard talk about the Fabians in America is a guy called Eric Trump, right? He knows who they are, right? In Australia, the Fabians got all the way up in Australia. Every country, Commonwealth country that you're now seeing that is part of the common law jurisdiction has been infiltrated by the Fabian Society at every single level, right? They are the most subversive, evil group of people you can ever come across, right? Without doubt. And by the way, Tony Blair is a Fabian, right? So when you start looking at what these people are doing, what did they do in Australia? It was the Attorney General or Secretary General, whatever you want to call them in Australia. He made himself up into a position of the Fabian Society in Australia. He was either the first or second president of the United Nations. Do you now understand where all this is coming from? It is global communism, right? And I'm not talking about the Gaddafis of this world, right? Because, I mean, what Gaddafi actually did, if you go into the history of what he did, right, he wasn't that bad a person, right? Literally, everyone was getting free houses, you was getting free fuel, you was getting food, you was getting houses, you got and everything, right? And they had to destroy him because of what he was actually doing out there. And he actually created rivers, and he literally reverse engineered, if you want to call it that, the deserts, right? So there are lots of things. I'm not suggesting that all these guys are the good guys, by the way, right? All I'm telling you is you've never, ever been told the truth. And the Fabian Society, again, with the Rhodes Scholars, again, you've got the Round Table, you've got all these. These are not conspiracy theories, people. These are facts, and you have to read the factual books that tells you the history of it. But once you do, so let me just make sure I'm clear on this, right? I don't take any pharmaceuticals whatsoever. Right? Technically, they told me I've got heart disease. I'm now reversing heart disease. I've literally was pre-diabetic. I've lost 5 stone. Right? Take responsibility for your own health. Right? That's all you got to do, and stop taking their pharmaceuticals because all they want to do is kill you. And that's exactly what they're going to do. And all them jabs are killing our kids because all they do when they put that jab into a little baby, they've got a patient for life. That's exactly what that's all about, right? There's more money in pharmaceuticals than there is in the military-industrial complex.
Graham, I've got to say we are going to be wrapping up soon, but I must comment. One of my first thoughts when I saw you today, I've not seen you in about, 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, probably.
And I can see the weight that you've lost, because I saw you in person last podcast. You're a lot bigger and you're doing really well. So keep going with the fasting, and all I can say is congratulations. We're going to take our last question now. I think it will have to be. Thanks, Graham. For those of you who aren't able to ask your question on the live stream, do remember that Graham is going to be sticking around. So hopefully he will be able to answer your question a little bit later in the evening.
Hey, Grant, thank you very much for a fantastic talk. Now I just wanted to ask a bit more about you're trying Charles for treason and where the
Torture.
monarchy... Right. Okay, for torture. Now, for where the monarchy stand regarding the English constitution, because it seems to me that one of the targets for the globalist attack on humanity is to end the monarchy, ultimately, and that the crown's or the sovereign's oath to God is the highest law of the land, it seems to me.
He's already betrayed that.
He certainly has as an individual, but as an institution, is there a higher law than that? How does that relate?
Right.
Do we need to protect the monarchy, or can we replace the monarchy?
The direct question. So let me just make sure I'm clear on this to everyone, right? I used to be somewhat of a monarchist, right? I absolutely can't stand the people, right? They are a bunch of paedophilic, nasty, horrible, entitled people. They don't belong in this realm anymore. And what I mean by that, without going into detail about who they are and what they are, right? They have betrayed the Declaration of Rights, which is the original the original contract, right? They have betrayed that. He's betrayed his oath. He's perjured his oath. He shouldn't be there anymore. He should lose everything he's got. He should be on the streets like a frigging peasant, like anyone else would be if they'd done what they've done to us, right? So I am not. Getting back to your point, and I do want to emphasise this, right? In our current regime, you could not have a president because of who is controlling the regime, right? And the election processes. Do I believe that we should go back to our original roots of Anglo-Saxons and elect our own king? Because the Anglo-Saxons actually had, believe it or not, right, they actually had a mobility system, right? And I don't mean mobility with a little funny drawing on it and a car. I mean, you could be a peasant, but if your people elected you as king, you could be king, right? In the Anglo-Saxon times, you could still do that, right? America has that institution, and they got it from England, right? The common law delivers either a president or a constitutional president or a constitutional monarchy, right? It's up to us to decide what we want. The problem you've got is the level of infiltration in this country. The people need to rise up against the complete tyranny and take the country back first. Someone else said to me earlier, we need to rewrite the constitution. You don't want to do that. That's exactly what the Marxists did and the Fabian Society did with Southern Ireland, right? And they've absolutely, you're seeing what's going on with Southern Ireland now, right? It was the Fabians that did that, because every other word it says common, it doesn't say common purpose, although that's another group of people. It says common good, for the common good, for the common good, right? You're about individual rights. You're not about the common good, right? If you're about your individual rights and your individual family, and as God intended, you have a family, you have children, and you provide for them, that family, and you look after that family, and you believe in God, right? You will always be good for society. Yeah, that's the difference, right? And what they're doing, and especially the atheists and all these Bolsheviks and the different groups of people, again, I say to people all the time, when you talk about Zionism and you talk about Bolsheviks, they are the opposite sides of a Talmudic coin, right? And that's what's causing you the problem. You've got two groups of people fighting against each other, and all of them want complete control of you, all right? There are a group of narcissistic rulers out there, and the world needs to take them down. And do I think it's going to happen? Yes, I do. Do I think, you know, everything you've just said there about the monarchy, it's well past its sell date. And listen, let me tell you something, right? When you go on a public when you take so much money off the public, by the way, they all said that I was about to ruin the coronation because we'd set up about 50 drones to fly into the Abbey, right? And let me tell you something, the police was on me big style, right? And we had the drones as well, right? And those things were being, and as soon as they opened them doors, right, them drones was going into that Abbey and flying about everywhere and saying, now what you going to do, right? And what did he do, right? He hid behind, the first time ever, he hid behind a valve. They put a little thing around. What was he doing behind there, right? What was it that monarch didn't want us to see, right? And for the first time in history, they've ever done that, right? Which is completely wrong. Again, going back to the monarchies, we haven't had a proper constitutional monarchy and government in this country, technically since 1849. The last time any monarch actually dissented from parliamentary law, which is what by law their job is, right? That's their job. The same as in America, the president can veto law, right? They haven't done it since Queen Anne, right? When the Scots turned around and said, we want to be armed against the English, and she turned around and said, I'm not assenting to that law, right? You either change it or this will happen, and they had to change it. The point I'm trying to make to you is the whole thing has been a lie. From history, I'm going to say this, probably finish on this, right? From history, and especially European history, there's something that a lot of people don't know, right? And that is when your enemy country conquered you and you had a monarchy, right? They took your monarch, chopped their head off, right? And they would put a dog on the crown, right? On the actual throne, and put robes around the dog. And then they would say to the dog, what do you command your people? And the dog would go, wah, 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 right? And then they would translate, right, from the dog to the people, right? Because it was a way of demoralising you, right? It still exists, people. That person is called a dog king. And King Charles III is the dog king. That's it.
Well, Graham, I still feel like this is to be continued as ever, because there's always more knowledge that you have. There's always more discussion to be had. I'm sorry for anyone who hasn't managed to get their question in, but Graham, you're still staying around for another bit, and we are going to be having very soon Raw Milk Conspiracy come and play. For those of you on the live stream, coming up, we have an advert from our sponsor, Knights Bullion. And can I just say thank you to Knights Bullion for making this possible, if that's okay. I'll get one last quick question. What do you think of gold?
What?
Gold.
Just to let you know, I shouldn't say too much about this, but I have been buying little bits of gold for a number of years. I don't see a major issue with Bitcoin, apart from, I like the blockchain, I like what it is, but if the power goes off, you're slaughtered. Gold, silver, they were the two main currencies. If I was in charge, and people say to me all the time, would you want to be Prime Minister? I say, no, make me Lord Chief Justice and I'll sort out the justice system, right? But let me just make sure everyone is aware of this, right? BRICS is very important. We're now coming off of the petrodollar. Russia is not your enemy. It is not the Soviet Union, right? Putin is not a Soviet. He is a Russian. He is a Russian Orthodox Christian. Remember that. And that's what they don't like. And they killed 70 million of them before. If they could do it again, they would. And he's the only one really fighting back. Have I got an issue with China? Not particularly. I don't particularly want to live in China, right? I don't want to live under any authoritarian regime. But you do have to realise, when you've got something like 1.8 billion people, it tends to be a bit hard to manage, right? So you can see that they do weird and wonderful things. I'm not pretending that they're the good guys, but what I am saying to you, right, is the American Empire took over from the British Empire. You have within your power the way to bring down the British Empire and finish imperialism, colonialism, overnight like that, where every nation would be free, including England.
Wow.